Later today, President Biden will issue public remarks about the positive and constantly improving state of the U.S. economy on his watch as part of a messaging agenda called Bidenomics. Intrigued? Then click that like and subscribe and enjoy the video. So one of the eternally recurring theses of this channel is the fact that the Democratic Party and Democratic administrations are factually better on the economy than their Republican counterparts, even though the public perception is the exact opposite of the truth, which is the idea that Republicans are better for the economy than Democrats. That's the public perception. You've probably heard the phrase fiscally conservative and socially liberal. That's just like the generic centrist view, that if you want social progress, you go to Democrats and the left, but if you want economic prosperity, you turn to the right. When the reality is, in terms of the historic trends and the data, is that if you want progress in both respects, if you want prosperity in both respects, socially and fiscally, you're better off electing Democrats. But perception is reality, right? So it doesn't matter what the facts are if people believe the opposite. For me, as far as I'm concerned, this is ultimately a twofold problem. Number one, Republicans are generally better at message discipline, number one. And number two, Democrats, for whatever reason, have been very ineffective and very hesitant to brag about their successes, either because they don't realize their successes or because they think it would be tacky to brag about their successes, or perhaps because they believe that if they brag about their successes, they don't incentivize people to turn out in the next election, or perhaps they believe that facts speak for themselves. Or perhaps it's a combination of all of these things. But whatever it is, in my opinion, I think we have to walk and chew gum at the same time. I think we have to tell voters, hey, listen, this is what needs to be done, and we're the ones to do it. And here's why we're the ones to do it. You should elect us. But also, I think you have to give voters proof that you've gotten stuff done when they've elected you before. You have to do both. You have to talk about what you want to do aspirationally, and so you need to be reelected to do it. But also, hey, as proof of concept, as proof of what we've done for you, here's what we've gotten done in the past. We have to do both. So President Biden's going to issue public remarks about the state of the economy, and I hope he's in full braggadocio mode. I hope he, yes, talks about the things that need to be done in the future, but also hypes up the fact that he's gotten quite a bit done under extraordinarily difficult circumstances, because facts don't speak for themselves, and we have to reclaim the narrative and change perceptions that Republicans are better about the economy when, in fact, they suck at it in comparison. So I want to talk about a couple of things which I'm sure President Biden will speak of in his speech later today. Number one, Biden is just killing it on jobs. 13 million jobs have been created under President Biden's watch in 2.5 years. That's an extraordinary figure. And it's also commensurate with a data trend, particularly over the past 40 years, which is that Democratic administrations generate more jobs by far than their Republican counterparts. That's not a matter of opinion. That's a fact. If you combine the jobs created under President Clinton, President Obama, and President Biden, that's like 42 out of the 45 million jobs which have been created since the end of the Cold War. Democrats are factually vastly superior on jobs than Republicans, so we should brag about it. But there are also some other data points that I hope President Biden mentions which aren't nearly as sexy as job creation or GDP growth or whatever. So I want to cover a few here to talk about how nuanced and multifaceted the Democratic Party's economic superiority over the Republican Party's actually is. So a few of them. The black-white unemployment gap. Typically speaking, as part of the systemic prejudice that we see between whites and blacks in this country, is the fact that the unemployment gap for African Americans tends to be higher, or tends to be greater than Caucasian unemployment. That's what we see. But under President Biden's watch, we've actually seen that gap effectively close for the first time in U.S. history. That's extraordinary. That's something that we never saw under the stewardship, the economic stewardship of Donald Trump or any other Republican, or quite frankly, under any other Democrat as well. The black-white unemployment gap is effectively closed, which is a great step towards not only economic, but social progress in this country. There's more still. When you consider the manufacturing investments in the United States. So Donald Trump bragged for years that he would restore domestic manufacturing and would incentivize businesses to stay in the United States rather than offshore their manufacturing to other countries. Donald Trump never got it done. President Biden has, thanks in part to the bipartisan infrastructure law, the the PACT Act, the CHIPS Act in particular. We have seen a restoration and a revitalization of domestic manufacturing on President Biden's watch, particularly with respect to semiconductor chips, which are a high-tech piece of technology that we use in every sphere of technology in the world: healthcare, automobiles, military. We need those semiconductor chips to power advanced technology, and we have been relying on foreign powers to provide that technology, which is part of the reason why inflation was so damn high during COVID, is because we need the semiconductor chips to make cars and advanced technology and all this equipment and stuff. So it was a high priority for the Biden administration to create an enormous semiconductor manufacturing capacity in the United States, which would also create jobs and reduce a national security issue, because if we need this piece of technology, this semiconductor chip, to power our technology, and we're relying on China or Taiwan to do it, and they're at conflict with one another, that's a potentially disastrous situation for national security. So under President Biden's watch, we are seeing billions upon billions upon billions of dollars of investment in domestic manufacturing and semiconductor chips, which is creating jobs. That's really, really good. But there's more than that as well. You talk about U.S. consumer confidence. So again, unfortunately, because we haven't messaged particularly well about the success of the economy under Democrats and President Biden, there's the perception that the economy is actually not doing well. And Republicans are help contributing to that as well, because they want people to believe that the economy under Democrats and under President Biden is bad when it's not. But we're actually seeing a restoration of U.S. consumer confidence. I think for 17 months, it's like at a 17-month high, which is great progress. It shows renewed labor market optimism, and business spending appears to be up here in late June since May, indicating the economy is remaining solid despite perennial fears of a recession. That's good, a restoration of U.S. consumer confidence. But wait, there's more. And these are other stats and figures that I hope President Biden mentions during his speech. So you compare the United States to other advanced economies, what we call the G7, so Japan and Germany and the European Union and the United Kingdom. The U.S. has recovered quicker and faster and to a greater extent than any other G7 nation since the pandemic. That's extraordinary. And inflation, which is a reminder, is it's a global issue. It's not just in the United States. It's a global phenomenon. We have the lowest inflation in the G7, which is further proof that President Biden's economic agenda is working, because if he was as bad on inflation as Republicans say, it would be higher than any other G7 nation, when in fact we are lower than any other G7 nation. There's still more work to be done, to be sure, but that is progress, and that is proof that the economic stewardship of President Biden and the Democrats is better than pretty much every other place on the planet. But wait, there's more than that. We are seeing producer inflation fall. So that's the other thing. It's basically at where it was in July 2020. We are seeing, in one major aspect of inflation, we're seeing a tremendous decline and a restoration to pre-pandemic levels, showing that President Biden's agenda is making progress on inflation when Republicans, again, would have you believe otherwise. So I'm hoping these things are mentioned in his speech later on today, because they're relatively obscure, again, less sexy, less high-profile facts and figures that are part of the nuanced Biden and Democratic economic agenda, and proof that it's working in so many ways that we take for granted. So kudos to President Biden, kudos for Democrats, and kudos to those who back them.